My name is Rachel Monroe, and the moment I found out I was pregnant was also the moment I realized I was completely alone. It happened on a quiet Thursday morning. I was running late for my shift at the auto shop, chugging black coffee, my stomach twisting in a way I'd assumed was just nerves. But something deeper tugged at me, a silence in my body that felt wrong. I pulled into a pharmacy on the way, bought a test, and 10 minutes later I sat frozen in the back seat of my old pickup truck with two pink lines staring back at me. Pregnant. Me. No plan, no backup, no clue. I called Nate, the man I'd lived with for over a year, my partner, my person. His phone rang until voicemail, again and again. By the fourth attempt, I wasn't just anxious, I was shaking. I drove straight home. His things were gone. Just gone. The drawers were empty, closet barren. His jacket, the one that smelled like smoke and cedar, wasn't hanging by the door anymore. No note, no explanation, just absence. And me, holding a test that would define the next chapter of my life. I couldn't breathe. I sat on the floor of the tiny apartment we'd shared, arms wrapped around my knees, and whispered to myself, "You can't fall apart right now. You just can't." But the truth, I was falling apart. Quietly, utterly. By sunset, I'd texted him once more, "I'm pregnant. Please call me." He never did. And if you've ever found yourself sitting in silence, hoping someone who once held your hand might care enough to answer, then maybe leave a like and let's walk through this story together. Because what happened next changed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. The next few days were a blur. I didn't eat much, didn't sleep. I still showed up for work, greasy hands under the hood of a 2004 Honda Civic, pretending everything was normal. But every clang of metal reminded me I was no longer just fixing engines, I was trying to fix a future I didn't even know how to build. I kept telling myself it was just temporary. Nate was probably just scared. Guys panic. They come around. That's what the internet said, right? But deep down, I knew better. Because the man I loved didn't vanish without a word unless he meant to. And here's the part no one warns you about. When the one person you think will stay suddenly disappears. It doesn't just feel like heartbreak. It feels like being erased. There were moments I stood in front of the mirror, hoodie zipped high to hide what hadn't even started showing yet, and asked myself, can I really do this alone? And then I remembered my mom. She raised me by herself after my dad left when I was 4. She worked 2 jobs, never missed a bill, never let me see her cry until the night I graduated high school, and found her sitting in the dark wine glass in hand, whispering, "I just wanted you to have more than I did." Maybe I could be like her. So I made a list. Get a second job, start a savings account, keep the pregnancy hidden until I was more stable. Don't tell anyone, not yet. I thought if I just had a plan, the rest would somehow come together. But life, as I was about to learn, doesn't follow lists. It breaks them apart line by line until you have no choice but to build something stronger. And I wasn't ready yet, but I was determined. By the end of that week, I'd sold Nate's old bike for $400, pawned my high school class ring, found a shared room listing for half my current rent. And I started looking at side gigs, anything that paid in cash, asked no questions, and didn't involve me standing in front of customers who might notice my jeans were fitting tighter. And every night I whispered to the tiny heartbeat inside me, "I don't know how, but I promise we're going to make it." If you've ever stood at the edge of your life unsure where solid ground begins, don't walk away. There's more to this story. And I need you with me. Let's keep going. Stay tuned. And if any part of this reminded you of someone you used to be or someone you had to become, drop a comment below. I'd love to know I'm not the only one. Chen CTA Ko Leo Ket Bai Fan 1. And if you believe every woman deserves the right to start over on her own terms, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and let's rewrite our stories together. The last place I expected to see him again was the Oak Ridge Mall in front of a boutique window, his hand casually resting on the waist of a woman I'd never met. Her name didn't matter then. What mattered was the way he looked at her, the same way he used to look at me. Like nothing else in the world existed. I stood frozen across the sidewalk, clutching a grocery bag that now felt heavier than my entire body. I wasn't even showing yet, but I felt 1,000 pounds heavier, with shame, with disbelief, with the sharp sting of recognition that this was the man who had once promised me forever, now smiling like I had never existed. She was stunning. Every strand of her blonde hair perfect, her heels clicking like they belonged on a runway. Her laugh floated through the air like wind chimes in summer. I looked down at my worn boots, my grease-stained hoodie, and suddenly felt like a ghost that had wandered into the wrong story. He noticed me just as I turned to leave. Natalie, his voice snapped through the noise. I turned, slowly, quietly, still holding the bag like it might anchor me to the pavement. He stepped forward cautiously, the smile fading from his lips. The woman on his arm gave me a once-over so sharp it could have sliced glass. Her grip on him tightened like a warning. What are you doing here?" he asked, sounding more cornered than curious. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I live here, Nate. Unlike you, I didn't disappear." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said it, loud enough for both of them to hear. "I'm pregnant." The woman, who I later learned was named Tessa, let out a laugh. But it wasn't kind, it wasn't shocked, it was rehearsed cruelty. "Pregnant with his baby?" she asked, tilting her head like I was something she found on the bottom of her shoe. "Sweetheart, I think you've confused delusion with reality." I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood there, letting the silence wrap around my heart like barbed wire. The tears stung, but I refused to let them fall. Nate rubbed the back of his neck. We weren't ready for that, Nat. You knew that." "No," I snapped. "You weren't ready. You left. You didn't call. You just vanished. You let me believe something happened to you." Tessa smirked. "He's with me now. So why don't you take care of your little problem and stop embarrassing yourself?" That was it. I walked straight up to Nate, looked him in the eyes, and said, "You are not a man. You're a coward in jeans and cologne." Then I turned to her. "And you enjoy the view from the pedestal. It's fragile." I didn't wait for a response. I turned, walked away, and this time I let the tears fall. Not because I was weak, but because I was angry. At him. At myself. At the universe for letting this happen. I got home, collapsed on the bathroom floor, and curled into myself like I could disappear. For the first time since that test turned positive, I questioned everything. Was I doing the right thing keeping this baby? Would I be enough? Would we survive? My phone buzzed with a message from my landlord reminding me rent was due. The fridge was half empty. The job I had barely paid enough. And the man who should have stood beside me just called my child a problem. But somewhere inside the storm I heard a whisper, not from outside, but from within. From the little life growing inside me. And I whispered back, "You're not a problem. You're my reason." I stood up, washed my face, looked myself in the mirror, and said, "You don't need his name. You'll make one of your own." This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore. This was about building a life, one that no man could abandon, no insult could shake, and no storm could drown. And if you've ever had to stand tall while everything around you crumbled, leave a comment below. Your strength might be the reason someone else doesn't give up. I didn't expect anyone to show up. I hadn't told a soul what happened with Nate or the baby, or the fact that I was now officially behind on rent and living on instant oatmeal. But somehow Ben did. Ben used to be my neighbor back when I was living in a crummy building near Lakeview. He was the kind of guy who always fixed your porch light before you even noticed it was out, the kind who didn't talk much, but when he did, you listened. He knocked on my door that evening with a six-pack in one hand and a takeout bag in the other. "You look like you haven't had a decent meal in days," he said with a half-smile. "Mind if I sit?" I didn't say a word, just moved aside and let him in. We ate in silence for a while. I picked at the fries. He didn't press. Eventually, he nodded toward my stomach, not in an obvious way, just a glance. A quiet question. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm pregnant." He didn't flinch, didn't say wow or "what are you going to do?" He just nodded again like he understood more than I could put into words. I figured, he said finally. "You've been carrying more than groceries lately." I let out a shaky breath. Then it all came pouring out. The test, Nate vanishing, the scene at the mall, the cruel things she said, the doubt, the fear, everything. Ben didn't interrupt once. When I was done, I felt like I'd bled out every ounce of shame and sadness onto the floor between us. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel empty. I felt lighter. That's when Carla, Ben's wife, arrived. She sat beside me, took my hand like we were sisters, and said something I'll never forget. "Don't let the person who broke you define what you build next." It wasn't just a kind phrase, it was a map, a compass. That night, they didn't offer pity. They offered a plan. Ben was a supervisor at a local taxi company. They needed drivers badly. The hours were long, and the boss was a notorious grump. But the pay was steady, and I knew cars like the back of my hand. "Why not?" Ben said, shrugging. "You already know more about engines than half the guys there." I hesitated. "Ben, I'm pregnant. No experience. And I don't exactly scream customer service." He chuckled. You scream determination, that's more valuable. Carla added, sometimes all you need is movement, a reason to get out of bed and into the world again. Let this be that. I didn't say yes right away, but the next morning I found myself standing in a cramped office that smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee. A man with a balding head and thick glasses sized me up from behind the desk, like I was a broken carburetor. You ever driven commercially? He barked. No, sir. You got a clean record? Yes, sir. He narrowed his eyes. You're not here to flirt your way through this job, are you? My jaw clenched. I'm here to work. Something about my tone must have struck the right nerve. He grunted, handed me a clipboard, and said, You start tomorrow. Don't be late. And don't waste my gas. Outside, I let out the longest exhale of my life. That night, Carla left a note on my doorstep with a warm container of lasagna. The note said, You've already survived the worst part. Now comes the part where you win. And maybe it was hormones. Or maybe it was hope finally showing up at my door. But I cried over that lasagna like it was a love letter. I wasn't just pregnant and alone anymore. I was pregnant and rebuilding. And if you've ever had to restart your life from scratch, drop a line below. Maybe your story will help someone realize they can too. The first week behind the wheel nearly broke me. They assigned me an old Crown Vic that rattled like a shopping cart on bad pavement. The shocks were shot, the heater only worked on one side, and the dispatch radio crackled so loud it gave me headaches. But I showed up. Every day. Hoodie zipped up to hide my stomach. Heart zipped up tighter to hide everything else. The shifts were brutal 10-12 hours. I drove all over Phoenix, office pickups, airport drop-offs, a guy who threw up in the back seat before 9 a.m., a teenager who blasted music like he was DJing a rave, and once a woman who spent the whole ride crying silently, mascara running down her cheeks. I didn't say a word, just handed her a napkin at the end. She squeezed my hand. Didn't tip, but I didn't care. The money wasn't great, but it was enough. Enough to pay rent, enough to eat something besides oatmeal, enough to put $20 a week into an envelope labeled baby. Every dollar I earned became a piece of armor. Not because it made me rich, but because it made me capable. Still, there were moments I wasn't sure I could keep going. There were days when the nausea came out of nowhere, and I had to pull over to breathe through it. Nights when I stared at the ceiling wondering if I was doing any of this right. What if I couldn't handle a baby? What if I got fired before I could even make it to month 6? What if, God forbid, something went wrong? But then I'd hear Carla's voice in my head. Movement is life, keep going. So I did. One Wednesday night around 10:45, I picked up an elderly woman from St. Joseph's Hospital. She had a cane and a bag of medicine, and she walked like the world had worn her down a long time ago. When I dropped her off, she asked, "Do you have kids?" I hesitated. Soon I said, "First one on the way." She smiled, handed me a small paper bag, and said, "Homemade lemon bars. No one should work this late without something sweet." I watched her walk to the front door of her quiet house cane, tapping rhythmically on the pavement. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something unexpected pride. Not for surviving Nate, not for keeping the pregnancy, but for showing up day after day when no one was clapping, no one was watching, and no one was helping. This life, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine, and I was building it brick by brick, fair by fair. That night back at the garage, Ben caught me wiping down the windshield of the cab. I hadn't realized I was smiling. "You're grinning," he said, eyebrows raised. I shrugged. Guess I made it through another day. He clapped my shoulder. "You're doing more than that, kid. You're living through it. That's harder." I didn't know it then, but the storm hadn't passed yet. The real twist, the one that would change everything, was waiting for me on a rainy road just a few nights later. And if you've ever found strength in places you didn't expect, leave a comment below. Your story might remind someone they're not broken, just becoming. It started like any other night shift, gray clouds pressing down, the smell of rain in the air, the city buzzing faintly beneath a blanket of unease. I had just finished a drop-off near North Central and was rerouting back toward the garage when the dispatcher crackled through telling me to skip the next pickup. "Client canceled," he said, voice bored. "Go home." I should have been relieved. I was exhausted. My lower back ached. The baby had been kicking non-stop since sunset, and I hadn't eaten anything except a granola bar since noon. But something in me didn't want to go home. Not yet. So I took the long way back out toward the edge of the city, where street lamps were sparse, and silence lived in the spaces between buildings. That's when I saw him. At first I thought it was an animal, a large shape stumbling out of the shadows, collapsing near the roadside like it had been thrown there. My heart leapt. I slowed the cab, rolled the window down halfway, and peered into the darkness. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, soaked from the rain. His clothes were torn, smeared with mud and blood. His face was bruised, lip split, one eye swollen shut. He tried to speak, barely whispered, "Help, please," before he crumpled onto the pavement. Everything in me screamed to leave. This is how people disappear, I thought. This is how they find your name on the news. But something else, something louder, pushed me out of the car. I heaved his arm around my shoulders, struggling to lift him. My belly pressed tight under my hoodie. My knees wobbled, but I didn't stop. I got him into the back seat, slammed the door, and hit the gas like my life depended on it. "Stay with me, okay?" I said, glancing into the mirror. "I'm Natalie. You're going to be all right." He didn't answer, just groaned and slipped deeper into unconsciousness. But just before we reached the ER entrance, he mumbled one word: "Jackson." I screeched into the hospital lot, flagged down 2 nurses, and watched as they rushed him inside. Then something strange happened. I found myself walking up to the reception desk, pulling out my wallet, and offering to cover his intake. "He didn't have ID," I explained. "He just needs help." The nurse looked at me like I was either an angel or an idiot. Maybe I was both. By the time I got back to my cab, I was soaked. Rain plastered my hair to my forehead, my socks squished inside my boots. And yet I felt alive. I had done something that mattered. That feeling didn't last long. When I returned to the garage, Armin, the manager, was waiting. "You think this is a charity?" He snapped, arms crossed. "I saw the footage. You picked up some bleeding vagrant and went rogue for over an hour. Who's paying for that fuel?" "He was dying," I shot back. "He needed help. And now you're paying for it. Consider your weekly bonus gone." I stood there, dripping rain on the concrete floor, fists clenched so tight, my nails bit into my palms. I wanted to scream, cry, quit. But instead, I walked past him without a word. Because the truth was, I had done the right thing. And maybe the world didn't reward that. Maybe I'd lose $100. Maybe Armin would make my life harder. But someone was alive because I chose not to look away. And if you've ever helped someone with no guarantee of being thanked, no reward at the end. If you've ever done the right thing and paid a price for it, leave a comment. I want to know who you are. You deserve to be seen. And if you believe kindness is never wasted even when it costs you something, subscribe, stay with me. This journey is far from over. The next morning, a knock at my door jolted me out of a restless sleep. I sat up, heart pounding, the blanket still tangled around my legs. For a second, I thought it might be Armin again, ready to ream me out for the previous night. Or worse, Nate showing up after weeks with that same tired excuse on his lips. But when I opened the door, it wasn't either of them. 3 men stood on my front step. 2 were clearly bodyguards, thick necks, earpieces, matching suits, hands clasped like they were ready to pounce. But it was the 3rd man who made my stomach twist. He was older, maybe mid-50s, impeccably dressed. Navy blue suit, gold cufflinks, leather shoes that had never seen dirt. His hair was silver at the temples, slicked back with the kind of arrogance that didn't require words. "You must be Natalie Monroe," he said, his voice smooth as glass. I nodded slowly, one hand instinctively dropping to my stomach beneath my hoodie. "Who's asking?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward uninvited and placed a thick white envelope on the small side table by my door. "My son Jackson," he said coolly. "You brought him to the hospital last night. I'm here to express my gratitude." I glanced down at the envelope. It looked heavy, tightly sealed. I didn't touch it. "He's okay?" I asked. "He's stable, recovering, nothing you need to concern yourself with." But it wasn't what he said, it was the way he said it. Like he was reciting a script. Like this wasn't the first time he'd done this. Then his eyes narrowed just slightly. "He didn't say anything strange, did he?" "On the way there." I blinked. "What?" "Sometimes trauma makes people speak nonsense. Hallucinations, accusations. I just want to make sure he didn't distress you." And there it was. The warning behind the smile. No, I lied. He was barely conscious. "Good," he said, lips curving upward in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Then let's keep it that way." He turned, nodded to the bodyguards, and walked off like this was a business meeting he'd just closed. The envelope stayed where he left it, and when I opened it after 20 minutes of pacing and doubt, it nearly made me drop the thing altogether. Cash, neatly stacked, maybe $5,000, maybe more. It didn't feel like gratitude. It felt like hush money. And if there's one thing I'd learned in my 27 years of getting underestimated, It's this: when someone with power pays you not to ask questions, the truth is uglier than you think. So I did the only thing that made sense. I went back to the hospital. The receptionist at the front desk was polite until I asked for Jackson. "I'm sorry," she said. "He's not taking visitors." "Can you just tell him Natalie's here?" I said. "He'll know me." She glanced at her screen, frowned slightly, then looked back at me. "I'm really sorry. He's been placed in a medically induced coma, per his father's request." That word hit me like a slap. Coma. I stepped back, my breath caught somewhere in my throat. "That doesn't make sense," I murmured. "He was talking yesterday." "I don't make the decisions," she said, softer this time. "I just log them." I turned to leave, heart racing, when another voice called out behind me. "Wait, you're the driver, right?" A young nurse, barely older than 25, motioned for me to follow her. Her badge read, Eva Moore. We ducked into a small supply room. "He's not in a coma," she whispered. "They're sedating him. Heavy doses, constant drip. Someone doesn't want him waking up." My skin turned cold. "Why?" She shook her head. "That man, his so-called father, paid off our chief of medicine." I overheard it. He said, "Keep him under until I say otherwise." "That's not medicine. That's a cover-up." I stared at her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you saved him once," she said. "And I think if you don't do something now, no one will." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jackson's bruised face in the back seat of my cab. Heard his voice, just one word: help. And now he was trapped in a hospital bed, drugged into silence, while the man claiming to be his father made sure he stayed that way. And me, I was just a cab driver, a pregnant one barely scraping by, living off diner leftovers and gas station coffee. I wasn't supposed to be in the middle of something like this. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't strong. I was surviving. But when Eva said, "If you don't do something now, no one will," I felt something inside me crack wide open, because she was right. I had already risked my job, my safety, hell, my sanity to pull Jackson off that road. I couldn't walk away now just because it was getting more dangerous. If anything, that was the sign I couldn't ignore it. By morning, I'd made my decision. I met Eva behind the hospital 2 nights later. We stood in the alley behind the West Wing entrance shadows, swallowing the fear between us. "You're really sure you want to do this?" she asked, adjusting the white nurse's cap on my head. I was dressed in borrowed scrubs, 2 sizes too tight, my hoodie zipped over the top to hide my belly. The mask she gave me was itchy tight and probably wouldn't fool anyone for long. "I'm sure," I whispered. "He'll die in there if we don't." She handed me a pair of gloves, then led me through a side door. The corridors were quiet, dimmed for night shift. No chatter, no footsteps. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of what we were about to do. Jackson's room was tucked in a corner with minimal monitoring, on purpose, I suspected. He looked even worse under the pale hospital lights. Eyes, sunken lips, cracked IV lines snaking from both arms. The machine beeped steadily, too steadily. Drug-induced sleep. Eva moved fast. She turned the IV valve, paused for a beat, then removed the line completely. "He'll wake slowly," she said, "but we don't have time to wait." We worked quickly, gurney, blanket, gloves off, mask back on. My hands trembled as we rolled him down the corridor, every squeak of the wheels sounding like a scream. I kept glancing behind me, expecting alarms, footsteps, or a voice calling out to stop us. But the hallway stayed silent. We reached the service exit. My cab was waiting, parked half on the sidewalk, trunk open. We loaded him in with every ounce of care we had, and before I could even whisper thank you, Eva shoved a paper bag into my hands. "Pain meds, antibiotics, glucose tabs," she said. "Instructions are inside. Don't take him to a clinic. Don't trust anyone with a lab coat." She looked at me one last time. "Just keep him alive." Then she disappeared into the hospital like a ghost. Back in the cab, Jackson groaned faintly as I turned the key. I whispered, "Hold on, just a little longer." The drive to my apartment felt endless. Every red light, every turn, I kept checking the mirror to make sure he was still breathing. When I finally got us home, I pulled him out with more strength than I knew I had. Half dragged, half supported, we stumbled through the door and onto the couch. His eyes fluttered, barely open, dry, disoriented. "Where am I?" he croaked. "You're safe," I whispered. "You're safe now." And just like that, the man I pulled off the road was lying on my couch, sedated, hunted, and holding on to consciousness by a thread. I had no plan, no backup, no help, but I had him, and that meant something. If you've ever taken a risk that made no logical sense, but every emotional one, share your moment in the comments. Someone might need to know they're not alone. And if you believe doing the right thing sometimes means breaking the rules, Hit subscribe and stay with me, because this story's just getting started. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of old leather disinfectant and something else, something raw and human and heavy. I rubbed my eyes, sat up slowly, and remembered Jackson was still on my couch. He hadn't moved much overnight. The blanket had slipped off his shoulder. His lips were dry, but his chest rose and fell steadily like the rhythm of a train finally back on track. I sat down beside him, handed him a glass of water, and watched him drink like he hadn't in days. "You saved me," he rasped, his voice rough like gravel. "Twice." I didn't say anything at first. I just nodded. He leaned back, wincing as he clutched his ribs. "I owe you more than I can say." "Then say the truth," I said. "What's really going on?" He looked at me for a long time. Then he started talking. His real name was Jackson Carter, and the man who called himself Jackson's father, Gregory Carter, his stepfather. He married Jackson's mom when Jackson was 3 after his biological father died in a car crash. At least that's what Jackson had been told. Gregory was charming in public, but a tyrant in private. The kind of man who smiled on magazine covers, but controlled everything behind closed doors. When Jackson's mother passed, Gregory took full control of the estate, the business, and Jackson's entire life. But what Gregory hadn't counted on was that Jackson's biological father had left him something. Something Gregory couldn't touch, controlling interest in a hotel chain worth millions. Jackson wasn't allowed to access it until his 25th birthday, which according to him was in exactly 5 days. He tried to get me to sign it over, Jackson said. Used lawyers, pressure, emotional blackmail. When that didn't work, he tried threats. Then they just took me. He paused, eyes distant. I don't remember all of it. One minute, I was walking out of a bar downtown. The next, I woke up in a basement somewhere. They beat me, starved me, told me I was going to stay asleep until I gave in. That's when I escaped. Ran into the trees. I don't even know how I ended up in your path. I felt my breath catch in my throat. He looked at me, then really looked at me. "And now you know why they want me gone." I nodded, and now they know I know too. Silence settled between us like dust. For the first time since the night Nate left, I wasn't thinking about my baby or rent or bills. I was thinking about a man whose life had been stolen in front of him, and how I'd become part of it. "You're not going back there," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Natalie." "No," I interrupted. "I don't care how dangerous it gets. You're not going back, not while I'm breathing." For a second, I thought he might laugh. But instead, I saw something flicker across his face, something I hadn't seen in him, or in myself, for a very long time. "Hope?" He reached for my hand, gripped it tight, and whispered, "Thank you." We sat there, both of us battered in our own ways, me with my belly stretched tight and fears stitched into every breath, him with bones barely mended and a life hanging in limbo. 2 people who had been discarded. 2 people deciding that maybe this time we wouldn't let ourselves be forgotten. If you've ever looked someone in the eye and told them, "Not on my watch, even when you were scared," drop a comment below. That's what courage really is. The next morning, Jackson was upright, his body weak, but his spirit sharper than ever. He sat on my couch, one arm wrapped protectively around his ribs, the other gripping a cup of hot tea I'd made from a box Carla gave me weeks ago. "I can't keep hiding," he said quietly. I was sitting on the floor nearby, folding a baby onesie I'd found at a thrift store for 75 cents. "I know," I replied. He stared down at the tea. "Gregory won't stop, not until I either sign over the inheritance or disappear for good." I swallowed hard. "Then we make him stop." His eyes met mine. "How?" I stood, wiped my palms on my jeans, and said the words before I had time to second-guess them. "You tell the truth. All of it. Publicly, officially." An hour later, we walked into the Phoenix District Attorney's office. Jackson in a borrowed hoodie and dark sunglasses, me in my usual worn sneakers, belly starting to stretch the seams of my coat. We didn't look like revolutionaries, but in that moment, we were exactly that. The receptionist did a double take when she saw Jackson's bruised face. "Sir, do you need medical?" "I need to speak to someone about an attempted kidnapping and financial fraud," he said. That got her attention. Within minutes, we were ushered into a small interview room. Jackson gave his name, his full story. He recounted the threats, the forged documents, the sedation, and the basement where he'd been held. He didn't cry. He didn't stutter. He spoke like a man who had run out of fear. I sat beside him, silent but unflinching. When he finished, the investigator leaned back slowly and asked, "Do you have any evidence of the bribe to the hospital?" I pulled the envelope from my bag, the one Gregory had dropped off at my door like a thank you card. neatly stacked hundreds still bundled untouched. He didn't say the word hush money, I said, but he might as well have. They photographed it, bagged it, took our statements, and promised to open a case. But I could tell from the look in Jackson's eyes that he didn't trust it. Not yet. Neither did I. Because people like Gregory Carter didn't go down because you asked nicely. They only fell when someone pushed. That night, Jackson and I sat on the worn couch in my apartment watching the sun bleed into the skyline. I thought I'd be scared, but I wasn't. I was angry, focused, ready. Around 9 p.m., a knock came at the door. 2 detectives stood outside. "Miss Monroe, we have a few follow-up questions," one of them said. "About the night you picked up Mr. Carter, and about the envelope you received." I nodded, stepping aside to let them in. Jackson stayed quiet but alert, his hand resting near his side like he was ready to fight if it came to that. The detectives asked everything, from the moment I saw Jackson stumbling out of the trees to what he mumbled in the back seat to the hospital visit, the bribe, and even the nurse who'd helped us, Eva. I didn't hold back. Neither did Jackson. When they left, one of them turned to me and said, "You did good, ma'am. I think we're going to bring this man down." Still, I didn't let myself exhale. Not until 3 days later when the news broke. Gregory Carter, CEO of Carter Legacy Hotels, was arrested in his Scottsdale estate. Charges included fraud, bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to kidnap. He was dragged out in handcuffs, screaming at the cameras, but before they shoved him into the cruiser, he locked eyes with me across the parking lot. "This isn't over, girl," he hissed. "You ruined everything." I stepped forward, calm hand resting over the curve of my stomach. "No," I said quietly, "you did that all by yourself. If you've ever stood face to face with someone who tried to silence you and found the strength to speak louder, tell me your story. Leave a comment. Let them know we don't disappear." The days that followed were a blur of headlines, subpoenas, and silence breaking like glass in every corner of the city. Gregory Carter, the man who had once held press conferences like a king greeting his kingdom, was now being paraded in handcuffs on national television. The media swarmed his estate, digging into every sealed file, every non-disclosure agreement, every charitable fund he'd hidden dirty money behind. The story dominated the news cycle. Heir escapes forced sedation, exposes family empire's corruption. Jackson's face was everywhere, bruised, determined, and defiant. And mine? Mine wasn't on camera, but it didn't need to be. I had already lived my part. When the DA called and asked Jackson to testify formally before a grand jury, he said yes without hesitation. And when they asked for any additional witnesses, he looked at me. "Are you okay with that?" I didn't hesitate either. So there we sat 2 days later in a courtroom so sterile it barely felt real. I spoke first about the night I found him, about the hospital, about the man in the suit who came knocking with a bribe. He dressed up as gratitude. I told them everything. No embellishment, no exaggeration. Just truth. And Jackson, he testified like a man who had waited his entire life to be heard. His voice cracked once when he spoke about his mother. But he didn't stop. He told them about the control, the manipulation, the fear. About how he'd spent most of his life being someone else's pawn, only to realize too late that silence was complicity. The room was quiet when we left. No one clapped, no applause. Just the echo of truth hanging in the air like thunder long after lightning has passed. Back at my apartment, we sat in the dim kitchen light, each of us sipping lukewarm tea, both too drained to talk. Jackson finally broke the silence. "You didn't have to do any of this, you know." "I know," I said. "But you didn't deserve to disappear. And I didn't save you so you could keep living like you were still trapped." He nodded slowly. "You gave me my life back." And then he did something I didn't expect. He reached across the table, touched my hand gently, and said, "I want to be part of yours, if you'll let me." I stared at him for a long moment, heart pounding. "Jackson, I don't mean to rush anything. I know you've been through hell. I have too. But this," he pointed between us then, to the small stack of baby supplies on the counter. "This feels like something I want to protect. Be part of. Not because I owe you, but because I care." I didn't say anything. I just reached over, placed his hand over my stomach, and whispered, "Then stay. But only if you mean it." He smiled. "I do. And if you've ever found someone willing to choose your broken pieces and build with them, share your story. I know I'm not the only one. And if you believe real love is forged in fire, not comfort, tap subscribe, leave a comment, and keep walking this road with me, because it only gets deeper from here." It didn't feel like a fairy tale. Not yet. The days after the courtroom weren't filled with magic or romance or spontaneous dances in the kitchen. They were filled with laundry, prenatal vitamins, cheap groceries, doctor's appointments paid in monthly installments, and silence, so much silence as both of us tried to learn how to breathe again. But slowly something shifted. Jackson didn't just stay, he showed up. He fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen without me asking. He stocked the fridge with things I craved before I even realized I wanted them. And on the mornings when I was too tired to stand, he helped me out of bed like it was the most normal thing in the world. We still didn't define what we were. There were no labels, no declarations, just presence, warm, steady presence. Until the night I went into labor. It was just after midnight. I had just lowered myself into bed when a sharp, stabbing pressure twisted through my lower back, curling around my abdomen like a vice. I froze, waited, breathed. Then it came again. I didn't scream. I had read enough parenting blogs to know that wasn't helpful, but I definitely panicked. I tried to stand, but my knees buckled. Jackson came running from the kitchen where he'd been finishing dishes, eyes wide. "It's time," I whispered. He didn't hesitate. Within minutes, the hospital bag was in the cab. I was in the back seat, breathing like I'd been taught, and Jackson was at the wheel, every red light, a battle, every turn, a careful prayer. We made it to the hospital just in time. The labor was long, 13 hours long and brutal, but Jackson never left my side. He held my hand through every contraction, whispered encouragement when I wanted to give up, and told me over and over again that I was the strongest woman he'd ever known. And then, just as the sun broke over the Phoenix skyline, Noah Monroe was born. 7 pounds 9 ounces, tiny, beautiful hours. They placed him on my chest and I cried, not from pain, not from exhaustion, but because in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt complete. Jackson stood beside me, eyes glassy with tears he didn't bother hiding. He kissed my forehead and said softly, "You did it. He's perfect." I looked at him. This man who had been a stranger on the side of the road. This man who could have disappeared like the last one, but didn't. "You did it too," I whispered. 3 days later, as I sat in the hospital bed, cradling Noah, Jackson walked in with something small clutched in his hand. He didn't say a word at first, just stood there, his eyes flicking between me and the baby. Then he walked over, knelt by the side of the bed, and held out a simple silver ring. "Nat," he said, "I don't know what tomorrow looks like. I don't know how to raise a kid, but I know I want to try with you. I love you, I love him, and I want to build something that lasts. If you'll let me." I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. I nodded, tears sliding down my cheeks. "Yes," I whispered. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And if you've ever found love not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of staying, of showing up, leave your story below. You never know who needs to believe that kind of love still exists. And if you believe families are built, not born, hit that subscribe button and walk this path with me. We've still got more to tell. Our life didn't transform overnight. There were no magazine covers, no million-dollar windfalls, no storybook houses with white picket fences. What we had was a second-hand crib Jackson found on Craigslist, a few bags of donated baby clothes, and a schedule built around short taxi shifts and feeding times. But you know what? It was enough. Noah came home swaddled in a blanket my mom had knitted years ago, one I'd found tucked away in a box labeled "just in case." It still smelled faintly like the cedar chest it had been hiding in, and when I wrapped him in it, I cried like I was holding both the past and the future in my arms at once. Jackson refused to let me do everything alone, even when I insisted, especially when I insisted. He changed diapers like a pro by day 3. Took midnight feeding shifts, even though he still winced when lifting anything heavier than a gallon of milk. He talked to Noah like he was already 6 years old, explaining the difference between torque and horsepower while rocking him to sleep. I laughed more than I had in years. And every now and then, I'd catch Jackson just watching our Sun-Eye's soft jaw set in a look I hadn't seen before. A kind of wonder. A kind of responsibility. Like he'd realized for the first time that the world was no longer just about him. He never called himself Noah's dad. Not yet. But every action whispered it louder than any word could. One afternoon, as I folded laundry on the couch, I asked him, "Do you ever miss your old life before all this?" He paused, bottle in one hand, Noah tucked in his arm. Then he smiled. Not for a second. There was so much we still didn't know. So much uncertainty. The case against Gregory was ongoing. His lawyers were working overtime to delay proceedings. The media had quieted down, but we knew it could flare back up with a single leaked photo or interview request. But for the first time, I didn't feel like we were running. We were building. One day, Jackson showed up at the front door with a stack of paperwork and a determined look in his eyes. "I bought a place," he said. My jaw dropped. "You what?" "Nothing fancy, just a small house. Out on 38th and Lincoln. 3 bedrooms, a backyard. Thought maybe Noah could use some grass to fall on." I couldn't speak. He looked nervous. "I didn't want to surprise you in a bad way. I just figured we've been surviving long enough. Maybe it's time we start living." He held out a key. "I want this to be ours, not just mine, not just yours, ours." I took the key slowly, my hands trembling. It wasn't about the house. It was what the house meant. Commitment, stability, a future. Later that night, as we stood in what would become Noah's nursery, Jackson ran his fingers along the window frame and said, "This room used to be empty. Now it holds everything that matters." I looked around at the bare walls, the chipped paint, the old ceiling fan that creaked when it spun. And for the first time, I didn't see flaws. I saw a possibility. If you've ever started over with nothing but grit, love, and duct tape, leave a comment. Your journey might be the reason someone keeps going. The house wasn't perfect, far from it. The front porch sagged on one side. The heater made a loud clunk every time it kicked on. The backyard was overrun with weeds taller than my knees, and the kitchen tiles were cracked in 3 places. But the first time I carried Noah through that front door, bundled in a fuzzy green onesie with ears on the hood, I felt like I'd stepped into a castle. It was ours, not rented, not borrowed, not someone else's generosity, a place we could call home and mean it. Jackson spent his weekends in a tool belt paint on his forearms, YouTube tutorials blaring from his phone as he learned how to fix drywall and retile a bathroom. I worked part-time shifts with the taxi company, saving every spare dollar for diapers, baby wipes, and a small emergency fund I kept taped under the sink. We didn't have family dropping by, no cousins with casseroles, no grandparents cooing over Noah, but we had us. And that was enough. Most nights after Noah fell asleep, we'd sit on the porch with 2 mugs of tea, sometimes talking, sometimes just breathing. Jackson would read legal updates about Gregory's case, and I'd knit tiny socks badly while watching the stars emerge through the gaps in the trees. I was finally beginning to feel safe. Then the past walked through the front door. It was a Saturday. We were at a travel agency downtown, flipping through brochures for a budget-friendly weekend trip, our first family getaway. Jackson held Noah on his hip while I filled out a form at the counter. When the agent called the next customer, I turned. And there he was, Nate. The last man who ever made me feel small enough to disappear. He froze when he saw me, like he'd just seen a ghost. His hair was shorter now, more styled, his clothes more polished. But the eyes were the same. Still darting, still calculating. "Natalie," he said, stepping forward. I didn't flinch, just stood a little straighter. "Hello, Nate?" He glanced at Noah, then at Jackson, who was watching calmly, one hand resting gently on my back. Nate's eyes narrowed. Is he mine? I felt my chest tighten, but not with fear, with clarity. "No," I said firmly. "This is Noah Monroe." And this, I looked at Jackson, who gave me a small nod. "This is my husband." There was a pause. Nate opened his mouth like he might argue, apologize, explain. But I didn't give him the chance. "We should go," I said to Jackson. "We have better places to be." As we walked out, Nate's voice followed. "You look different." I didn't turn around. Because he was right. I was different. I was no longer the girl who begged for answers. I was no longer the woman crying on the bathroom floor with a test in her hand and no plan in sight. I was a mother. A partner? A fighter who had built her life back from ash with nothing but grit, borrowed strength, and a baby who reminded her what love looked like. That night, as Jackson and I sat on the porch again, Noah dozing in his arms, I whispered, "Do you ever think about how close I was to giving up?" Jackson looked at me. "Yeah, but you didn't." I nodded. "No, I didn't." And if you've ever come face to face with the version of yourself you used to be and chosen not to go back, leave your story in the comments. Someone out there needs proof that healing isn't just possible, it's powerful. The thing about healing is, it doesn't announce itself. There's no siren that wails when you finally turn the corner, no headline that screams, "She's okay now." Healing is quiet. It slips in when you're not looking, like laughter returning after a long silence, or peace settling in places where pain used to live. Ours came in the form of chaos, joyful, messy, beautiful chaos. Noah started crawling at exactly 9 months old, and from that moment forward, nothing in the house was safe. He knocked over lamps, pulled Tupperware out of drawers, and found his way into every pile of folded laundry like it was his personal treasure hunt. Our home was loud and lived in. Dishes in the sink, toy cars under the couch, sticky fingerprints on everything, and I loved every second of it. Jackson and I had found a rhythm. He took over the business his father once controlled, but not in the way Gregory had. Jackson rebuilt it, rewrote its rules from the ground up. He replaced half the board with people who'd once been ignored, reallocated funds toward community programs. He paid his employees fairly, gave parental leave, and turned every executive decision into an act of rebellion against the empire he'd inherited. People before profits, he'd say, and he meant it. He came home every night at 6:30 like clockwork. He'd scoop Noah into his arms, kiss my forehead, and ask, "What do you need most right now? A nap or a bath?" I'd laugh and say both. Then he'd start dinner anyway. Some nights we'd drive to the old taco stand where we had our first conversation after his recovery. It wasn't fancy, just a beat-up food truck on 12th Street. But they knew our names, and they always had a high chair ready. Noah loved it there, especially the churros. But even in all that peace, all that newness, the ghosts didn't vanish. Sometimes I still woke up with the echo of Gregory's threats in my ears. Sometimes Jackson would stare off too long, eyes narrowed like he was replaying old bruises in his mind. But we didn't ignore those shadows. We named them, talked about them, held space for them, but never let them take over. One evening in late autumn, we took Noah to the park. Leaves crunched under our boots. The air smelled like cinnamon and earth. Jackson had a thermos of hot cider in one hand, and in the other he carried Noah's favorite stuffed raccoon, ragged and missing one eye, but well-loved. Noah was walking now, well, more like tumbling forward with enthusiasm and very little balance. He giggled every time he fell, only to pick himself up and go again. I watched him chase a leaf across the grass and whispered, "He doesn't even know how strong he is yet." Jackson smiled beside me. "Neither did you. Once." I looked at him. "You think we would have found each other without the wreckage?" He thought for a second. "I think we needed the wreckage to understand the rebuilding." That hit me deeper than I expected. Because he was right. Without Nate, without the betrayal, the loneliness, the panic, I might never have known what it meant to truly choose myself. And without pulling a broken man from the side of a dark road, I might never have found someone willing to walk beside me for real. If you've ever had to build a life from what someone else tried to burn down, leave your mark below. Let someone know it's possible. That joy isn't for the lucky, it's for the brave. The final piece of the past returned quietly, without warning, without thunder. It was a plain envelope in our mailbox one Monday afternoon, tucked between a coupon booklet and a baby toy catalog. I opened it while Noah napped and Jackson was replacing a door hinge upstairs. Inside was a letter, from Gregory Carter. I hadn't thought about him in months. After his trial, his lawyers dragged the process out for almost a year, but eventually the system caught up. He was sentenced to 18 years without parole. Fraud, conspiracy, bribery, attempted kidnapping. The list was long and the courtroom had been full the day the gavel dropped. I didn't go. Jackson did. I stayed home with Noah and planted a tree in the backyard. But now there it was. A letter, signed by him, handwritten. In it, Gregory never used the word sorry. Not once. Instead, he justified, reframed. He called what happened a misunderstanding. Said he only wanted what was best for Jackson. He wrote about loyalty, legacy, control. He said, "You poisoned my son against me." And at the very end he wrote, "You may have taken everything I built, but you'll never understand the weight of being right." I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and slid it into the trash. Not out of fear, out of freedom. That night I didn't tell Jackson, not right away. We were sitting in Noah's room watching him line up his toy animals along the windowsill: giraffe, lion, elephant, dragon. All equal in his little world. Jackson leaned into me, his voice low. "Do you ever think we got lucky?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "I think we got brave." He nodded slowly, understanding the difference. Later, after Noah was asleep, I told him about the letter. I saw his shoulders tense, jaw tighten, but only for a moment. Then he reached across the table, took my hand and whispered, "You didn't just save me. You changed everything." I smiled. So did you. We sat there in silence, the kind that doesn't beg to be filled. The kind that comes after surviving a war neither of us had chosen, but both of us had walked away from hand in hand. And as the night deepened, I thought back to the girl I used to be. The one kneeling on a bathroom floor, holding a test with shaking fingers, and an empty apartment echoing around her. The one who thought her life had ended because a man chose to leave. She had no idea she was standing at the beginning. She didn't know that the worst moment of her life would lead her to the best one. That a bloodied man on a rainy road would become the partner she never dared dream of. That her baby, once a question mark, would become the light by which she navigated every dark place. She didn't know that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the act of choosing to stay, to keep going, to believe that this time love will hold. And if you've ever whispered, "I won't break in a moment where no one could hear you," then you understand. This isn't just a story, it's proof. So if you believe healing is a choice and love is worth fighting for, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment. Tell someone how you made it through. Let's keep showing up for each other, one story at a time. The story we've walked through is more than just a tale of survival. It's a testament to the power of resilience, hope, and the human spirit. Life doesn't always give us fair deals or easy paths. Sometimes it drops us into darkness with nothing but our own will to light the way. But here's the truth: healing begins the moment you choose to keep moving forward, even when your legs feel like they'll give out. Love isn't always loud and grand. It often whispers softly in moments of kindness, steady presence, and unshakable support. In the quiet aftermath of pain, we find strength we never knew we had. We build families from broken pieces, craft futures from uncertainty, and create homes from hope. The choices we make to forgive, to fight, to trust again, define not just our stories, but who we become. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this journey, it's this: your past does not dictate your future. Your worth is not determined by those who abandoned you. Your story is still being written, and you hold the pen. Whether you're facing a battle with heartbreak, betrayal, or fear, know that there's a path forward. It won't always be easy. It won't always be clear. But every step, no matter how small, is progress. Thank you for walking this road with me. If this story touched your heart, if it gave you even a flicker of hope, please share it. Let others know they're not alone. And remember, your courage to keep going might just be the light someone else needs. So here's to choosing hope, embracing love, and building a life that's unapologetically yours. If you believe in the power of stories to heal and inspire, please subscribe and join this community. Together we can write the next chapter, one filled with strength, compassion, and endless possibility. Thank you for listening.